Hey, good morning. I'm Lisa with Apex Revenue Media, and today I have a guest. But before I introduce my guest, I want to give a shout out to our location sponsor, First Coast Promotions. Today's guest is a member of the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. He was a writer for the National Racquetball Magazine and the Times-Union Magazine. He was a cover boy for the National Racquetball Magazine as well, and the Jacksonville Business Journal. He was a copy boy for the New York Daily News, a sports editor for the Post at Ohio University. One of his stories about a one-eyed basketball player went national. He's been married for 39 years. He met his wife at the Wire Room for the school newspaper at Ohio U. He sent both of his kids to college that are both debt-free. He's been doing promotional advertising since 1987. He has over 200 clients all over the nation. He also builds online stores for these organizations, and he's helped raise over $50,000 for charity. He's been to countries such as Canada, Israel, Puerto Rico, and England, and he was an honorary speaker. Let me introduce you to Promo Norm. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Where are you from, and was your family supportive of you and your creative endeavors?
Okay, so I'm originally from New York. I have two sisters, and unfortunately my dad died when I was nine years old. So great. He was an accountant, but he was an accountant with personality. So it's like everyone wanted to work with Jerry because he was a storyteller and he jokester, and they liked his personality. So it's like, so I always, that resonated with me. When people visited him in the hospital, he was entertaining them. So that was his nature, and I think I don't know if it's inherited or I don't, who knows, chicken and egg, who knows if that's just part of you or if it's a learned behavior. I don't know the answer to that, but my mom was she was more into the stability, and she wanted my two sisters to get in the teaching profession so they'd have a steady income and have summers off so they could travel. So that wasn't my makeup.
What did they want you to do?
She thought I might be a phys ed teacher or something. So I liked sports.
Right.
But I kind of was, did the sports writing with the student newspapers from elementary school all the way up to high school. So there was no debate of whether I was going to get into that. I was going to be a journalism major, and that was, that was the way it was going to be. So so that was my passion at the time. But then, we all evolve, and I think my having to be on my own and be responsible for my own success was paramount to me. That's what kind of was my drive. I didn't want someone to tell me what to do, where to be, what time, and I didn't want anyone. I just didn't like that concept.
So you were a writer back in the day.
That's right. I was a sports writer. I guess my last time I got a memo was when I was at the Florida Times-Union. I guess that was 1979. So, but I always had the urge to be on my own. Mm-hmm. I just didn't like having a boss. So, so I decided, I got introduced to the sport of racquetball, playing it, and then I decided to start a statewide racquetball newspaper. And, and I had no backing to speak of, but I had the passion for that because I saw it was a hot sport, and I just thought I could do it. So, the managing editor of the Times-Union, I told him what I was going to do, and he said, just sit down, use the typesetting equipment here. People won't know that you're not here. So I didn't have that expense. Then I had to get boxes for, to ship out the stuff to all the various clubs. Well, Jack's Liquors got to know me pretty well, so I just used boxes from Jack's Liquors. So I was always able to, cut down on the expenses.
Right.
So it was, and then of course, I had to sell advertising, and my first major ad was to AMF Head, and they had told me we don't advertise with a publication unless they're a year old. I said, so I went to trade shows, and I'd run into the guy at AMF Head, and finally, after much persistence, he said, "You're getting on my nerves, kid. I'll take out a full-page ad for a year." So I was pretty much stoked after that. So that kind of covered our nut for basically the whole year. And then, the paper was, I was a fairly decent writer, so it was popular. It would get to the clubs. So it was so popular that I decided, what if I have my own events? Use the newspaper to run my own events, like a tournament or a weekend racquetball camp, things like that. Racquetball jewelry. So I started using the paper to promote my own events. And before you knew it, I had I'd get the number one racquetball player in the world. He'd give a clinic to, let's say it was Racket Power in Jacksonville. He'd give a clinic, and I'd have the beer distributor pay his fee, and the club wouldn't charge me because they'd give their members a clinic from the number one player in the world. So it was a nice promotion for them. So everything was win-win-win. So I ran tournaments, and it was good. And then I started writing a column for the National Racquetball magazine called Passing Shots, and they would give me, in exchange for that, they'd give me advertising space. So I'd sell my jewelry, my racquetball jewelry on the in the magazine. So it was a another win-win situation.
So it sounds like everything that you started to do once you became a writer just started to fall into place.
Yeah.
So then, how did you become a writer? Like, how did that start?
Oh well, I was always interested in sports, so I started writing, and we had a little school newspaper in elementary school, and then in middle school came this sports editor, and then high school I became sports editor there, so it kind of evolved. And then I had an opportunity to become a copy boy at the New York Daily News. I think I was saying, tragically, a kid had died several years ago, and the editor of the New York Daily News set up a scholarship in his son's honor for someone from our high school newspaper to become a copy boy, which is basically a glorified. You'd buy coffee for the editors, and you'd have to take film from Chase Stadium and pick it up and run it to the newsroom. So just things like that. So so it was anyway. The school advisor was basically telling us, the editor and myself, you guys have passion. It was too bad we can't have that scholarship anymore. Well, I promptly, called the father of and told him I'd like to get that renewed, and he was grateful. And he was like almost crying, as you can imagine. And he asked me, when can you come to the Daily News for an interview? And I said, how about tomorrow morning?
Wow.
So I got there, and the editor said, well, two guys from that school bailed out. Why won't that happen with you? I said, called yesterday, I'm here today. And basically said, like your moxie, kid. And he said, you'll start this summer and don't disappoint me. So I got so I did it, and I got a chance to write a couple of stories at the New York Daily News, which at the time was the largest circulation in the world. And so the first story I wrote was the ball boys are stars at the U.S. Open, Forest Hills. That's where they played the tournament, and John McEnroe happened to have been a ball boy. So
that's so awesome.
So I wrote the story, and I must have picked up 50 copies of the paper because that was a big thing.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So then so then in college I went to, applied. They had a daily newspaper, so I applied for a job as the sports writer. And because of that copy boy experience, that kind of gave me the edge. So and then I became sports editor of the college newspaper. And then we had one big story, which was went national. This Ohio University had banned this kid from playing basketball because he had one eye. So I researched it, and I discovered that Mo Udall, who was a senator from Utah and was running in a Democratic primary for president, also had one eye. So I was on break, so I went to New York, Park Avenue apartment, and I had to set up an interview with Mo Udall, and he tells me, you tell that school that boy should play. He said, I'm going to take my eye out now and twirl it on my finger. So the ACLU got involved, and then it just so happened I fed the story to the Associated Press, in Cincinnati, and that writer at Cincinnati also had one eye. I mean, what are the odds?
Right.
So that story went national, and the kid, they reinstated the kid on the team. He made his first 2 shots. The stadium went nuts, and that was only two baskets he made for his career. But it was a great story. But that story, because it went national, and because I also created I suggested to Mo Udall that he play this kid one-on-one, in Ohio, since they were going through a primary. That would get a lot of people listening. Oh, I love that.
Did he?
Yeah, so he came, they played the kid, and the news media was all over. They soaked that up. So that was a good, great promotion. So again, when I was applying for an internship at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, I had shared that story, and that was a unique story, and I got that internship. And then I took my first job in Sandusky, Ohio, and then and I was there for a year. But then prior to taking the job in Sandusky, I had another interview in New Jersey, and I was like 3 hours early because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get lost. So I stopped in Wilmington, Delaware, since I was so early, and I just knocked on the newspaper door, and I had my clip book, and the guy told me, well, you have to be here 3 years before we apply. That's our minimum requirement, but I like what you have. Keep in touch. So here I was in Sandusky. I was writing a column called "Throw the Blum Out." The football team was 0-12, and the community didn't like what I was writing, so I got burned in effigy at halftime of a football game, and then there'd be basketball gymnasium, there'd be signs, "Throw the Blum Out." I get booed, and I tell them, well, at least you're reading me.
Yes.
So that's what I would tell the folks. But it was, they'd get threats and everything like that. But, so I called the guy in Delaware. I said, told me to keep in touch. And he said, well, I know of an opening in Jacksonville, so why don't you give this guy a call? So I called the guy. His name was Henry Freeman, was a guy in Wilmington. So I told him, Henry Freeman told me to give you a call. And basically he said, well, if Henry told you to give me a call, that's good enough for me. So I got hired. And, so it was exciting at first, but I kind of, I was kind of getting tired of sports writing, and I didn't like the way some of the older sports writers were treated. I just didn't like, and I just said to myself, I'm not going to be treated this way. I said, I just have a need to go on my own. And that's when I started the Racquetball newspaper with it, and that was pretty exciting. And I did that for 5 years, but then the sport took a nosedive. We had we must have 40 courts here in Jacksonville, Racket Power, Jacksonville Racquetball Club, and all of a sudden we had too many courts and not enough players.
Right.
So the sport the clubs started closing left and right. So I kind of had to see the handwriting on the wall. And then one of my vendors that I used as a catering, because we had to feed the players at the tournaments, asked me, he said, you beat me up pretty well on this catering. I bet you can do better for me with these T-shirts for restaurants. So they became my first client, Woody's Barbecue, and they're still my client today.
Wow.
So that was my first client. And then I joined the Jacksonville Chamber, and then I ran into someone at a trade show who ran a Leeds club, and one of the leads from the Leeds club was Barnett Bank was giving a new purchasing person. So I met with that person, and we hit it off, and
the rest is history.
The rest is history.
So your business, First Coast Promotions, you do mugs, T-shirts, jerseys, all kinds of things, and I know that you also do online stores for groups, teams, reunions, and so many more. Tell me about that.
Well, let's say for example, a family reunion. This lady was telling me she had a family reunion, and she said she would get 100 T-shirts in the past, and Sally would say, I'll pay you when I get there. Well, then Sally would get there and say, well, I'm a little short. Meanwhile, she had already ordered the 100 shirts. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, this online store, Sally will pay for it ahead of time, so you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about that.
So that's perfect for anyone that has like a team or even
Yeah.
like a club.
Yeah, yeah. We try to get with at least 50, a minimum of 50 members. So because we don't want to do something for 10 people or things like
and
that.
And then that just makes it so easy for
Yeah.
people to pay ahead. Because I know
Yeah.
that I've ordered stuff in bulk for certain groups,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, so and so hasn't paid yet, but I
Yeah.
already ordered all
Yeah,
this
it's
stuff.
a pain in the neck, and it's very easy to use. So I have to thank Raymond, who was he was a Princeton kid who was very anal. So when we were first doing it, we had Raymond look it over to make sure there weren't any problems with it, and he gave me a one-word email, intuitive. So he gave it the good housekeeping seal of approval for it. So it turned out. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you, Raymond, wherever you are. How cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then what I really find interesting, besides like everything that you've done that's so amazing, is I know that for me, being a fellow creative, I know that I was supposed to be a nurse, a doctor, a psychologist, and, all these things that I didn't want to be, but other people wanted me to be. And you stayed true to your passion the entire time. I know it might seem like common sense, do what you want, but a lot of people, like for me, I like to please my family, so to me it was like, okay, well, this is good for the family, I'm going to do this, try it out, it didn't work out, then I went and pursued my art. But for you, you're just like, no, this is me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, when my daughter was a freshman at Princeton, they gave a little handbook, and the book was basically what people's major were and what they ended up doing, and probably the gist of it was that their major had nothing to do with what they would end up doing. So some person would be a European history major, but was at the working at the UN, So so their philosophy was to study your passion, what you like, and then things will fall into place. You don't have to be I'm not, if you've always wanted to be a nurse, that's fine, but don't just be a nurse because someone told you to be a nurse. So as long as you have, so I always thought that kind of made sense.
Right, because at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you're wearing those shoes, you want to be happy in the shoes that you wear.
So I remember my daughter majored in sociology, and all these people, concerned parents, they'd say, well, what's she going to do with that? And I said, well, she'll figure it out. I said, they're just teaching you how to think. And if you're a math person, that teaches you how to figure things out. So I said that it'll be fine. Don't worry. Thank you for your concern, but don't worry. Same thing with my son's was a history major, and he's don't be surprised if he writes a great history book one day. And he's a national park ranger at a historical park in Utah now. And he's the expert with the trains. I guess that was when the East met West. That happened in Utah, and so there's a lot of history there. So
wow.
That's his passion. And his sister told him, when he was deciding what his major was going to be, his sister said, well, you read a 700-page Teddy Roosevelt book for fun, so I think you're a history major.
Right.
So I kind of believe that.
So then that's it. That's it. So whatever you want to be, do it, and just stay true to what your calling is, because that's you. That's your life.
Yeah, it's not that complicated, I don't think, but maybe it is. But I don't know. That's kind of been my belief system.
I like that.
Thank you.
So besides the online stores, you do T-shirts, mugs, jerseys, you name it, you can get it on it, right?
Yeah, you betcha.
That's awesome. Okay, so then now we know. T-shirts, shirts, mugs, you name it, he'll get it on there. And if you have a team, a group, a reunion, just a group of people who need the same logo, so you don't have to worry about someone didn't pay their part yet, he can create an online store for you to where they all just take care of it, and they can just pick out whatever they want with that logo on there. So you're saving us a tremendous headache, because I've been there.
Yeah, I like to think so.
So do you have anything else for our friends before we go?
My only advice is just follow your passion, do what you want to do. And as long as you can make a living, that shouldn't be any problem. I mean, if you're a music, if you're into music but you can't carry a note, then you might have to rethink that. But but you could probably get into some other aspect of the music field, so you don't have to give it up completely. Just kind of be a little flexible.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so how do we get a hold of you?
Okay, promonorm.com or 262-9155 or bestclubgear.com.
You heard it right here from Promo Norm. Whatever you need, he's got you covered. This is Lisa with Apex Revenue Media, Promo Norm with First Coast Promotions, and I'll see you next time.